Hi, I'm Simon Sweetman, and this is my new book, The Death of Music Journalism. It's my second book, but it's my first book of poems. I'm going to read you a few short poems and maybe one longer poem from this, and I thank you for tuning in. I hope you like it. I'm a big fan of the work that Paula does with her poetry website. I think it was my publisher, the Cuba Press, who called her poetry's best friend. Um, I like that. I think that's very much what she's doing by sharing all of this stuff, and I'm a big fan of the things that she puts out there, her own work and the work of all of the poets that she gets across. I want to read you a poem about one of my favourite New Zealand poets. I'm sure he's been of big impact to many of us, at least at some point. It's about Sam Hunt. It's actually about a photograph I took of Sam Hunt about 20 years ago. So I call this poem, I took a photo of Sam Hunt in Upper Hutt 20 years ago. I have a photograph of Sam Hunt. I took it looking up at him from the floor, my jaw down by my camera and me in awe of it all. It was about 20 years ago, and I had been reading his words for at least 10 years then. I had met him briefly outside the pub in Hastings, where he was looking to cadge a fag after reciting Baxter and quoting lines from Dylan, Lou Reed and Keith Richards. I told him in nervous schoolboy rising voice that I loved Lou Reed and knew the New York album he'd referenced, my favourite. I hadn't had to tell him I snuck into the pub underage, and when he asked me for a durry, I was almost embarrassed to be a healthy non-smoker. He signed my book, Simon from one Lou Reed man to another, Sam, and I could only ever read it in his voice, like a poem only he might ever write. I loaned that book out to someone many years later, never got it back. A year after taking this photograph of Sam shaking the poems from his shoulders, I was his opening act. Nervously, I read a poem about how history and opinion were both 7-letter words, but only one fits correctly into the crossword, and this was inspired by the crosswords me and my wife had been having as she focused on completing the newspaper puzzle, and I became Sermon Sweetman, going on about how Elvis really was the best, the greatest, the first, the one. After my set, there was a note at the bar to join Sam in his room, and I did. He had a bottle of wine he wanted to share, said he didn't like hanging in the bar for too long during other people reading because he'd get bugged by the punters and it wasn't fair to him or the person on stage or the others in the pub there to listen. We drank the wine and he told me he had seen a couple of my poems and I'd done a good job, and he liked very much the one about the crossword. I told him far too quickly that he could have it and shuffled through the pages to hand him that poem. He nodded, and several seconds later he declared, "Well, all right." He stood in the stovepipes and opened a little vintage suitcase, mumbling as he showed me his kid's school photo. He carried it in the case with him. It was the whole class photo, covered in glad wrap, and his son's 5-year-old face was circled in red marker. He said something like, "Well, you've given me some of your very best words. I'd like to give you some good words too." He shuffled through typed pages and then paused to look at one for a while, then loudly said, Yeah, I'd like to give you some Wordsworth," as he handed me a cover poem, which made total sense, since the sum worth of his own words is forever held in his head. I kept that Wordsworth poem in a folder for years, then lost it, or binned it, or loaned it out like the signed book, never to return. I've got the photograph still. I look at it most days. So that's my wee tribute to Sam. What else can I read you from this book? I would like to read you a poem that I wrote for my wife Katie, or it's about her, it's about us, and the book is dedicated to Katie and also to our son Oscar. So this is a poem to Katie. It's called A Fine Thing. You with your funny ways, me with the things I say, we're a pair and just as well. I'd be lost without you. You'd probably get by without me, but you'd never say that, at least not out loud. You've always been a kinder soul. That's part of how the balance is achieved. I like to think that's me doing my bit, or you allowing me that chance. A fine thing. I've also written a poem about, or for Oscar, a couple actually. Um, I would like to read you one of those, and it is called Weekend Fun. And it goes like this. Saturday morning, the kid in bed. I'm telling stories of the things I did when I was his age, silly stuff that he'll laugh at and repeat, and then he'll ask me to repeat it so he can get the exact wording and copy my voice. Saturday afternoon, we're watching a film. Pause, rewind, watch the funny bit again, and again, and again, and then wait for more funny bits expectantly, hopeful. Saturday night, it's time for bed. A great day of laughs. No stress, only fun. One more long cuddle. His legs and body seem to almost run the length of mine. He'll be asleep soon, and I can worry only then about all of the time we might never have. I'm going to finish with a poem about Oscar and Katie, and well, it is about that, and it is also about the TV show Taxi, which I am a big fan of. I grew up with that TV show, and I actually still watch it. I watch as many reruns of that as I can find. I find them on the internet these days, of course, and I'm a big fan of the soundtrack, the music, which is by Bob James. I'm a big fan of all of his music, but his theme to Taxi, which is called Angela, used to be how I finished my DJ sets, thinking it was a funny joke that, now it's time to call a taxi. So I got so hooked on that piece of music that I used to listen to it in the car a lot. And so this is a poem about all of those things. It's called Taxi. He's in the back of the car as usual, and I'm his taxi driver. My son asks me if the day he was born was the best day of my life, and I say, yes, of course. What about when you and Mum got married? Second, nearly as good. Can't have one without the other. He nods. And I didn't go on to tell him that the third best day of my life was when he had just turned 2. We were driving to Hawke's Bay for Christmas, he and his mother asleep. And I had the iPod connected to the car stereo, and I made a playlist. The theme from the TV show Taxi on a loop, so that I didn't have to keep pressing play or find the repeat function. I had the same track loaded 30 or 40 times. Bob James's perfect Fender Rhodes instrumental, with Ralph McDonald on percussion and Idris Muhammad on drums. Sounds like Eric Gale's guitar slow burning in the lava lamp glow. I was their taxi driver. I'd look to the left, then to the back left. That music from my childhood guiding the way. It was like I was the yellow cab in a time loop, a New York minute, driving over and over the Queensborough Bridge, checking my buckled passengers, 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock, resting, their beautiful faces, those wondrous souls, all fire, all glitter and gold, first and second, first equal, of course, and the music, my mantra, my meditation, taking me back to the Friday nights when we'd wait for Dad to come home with the fish and chips, when we'd laugh at Louie's anger and Jim's madness and the weird and silly and wonderful Latka. Me and my brother and my mum and dad were maybe at our closest watching MASH and Family Ties, Blackadder, The Young Ones, Cheers, Married with Children and a few others, definitely Taxi. But here I was, driving the white lines with this music that was taking me back and taking me back as I was edging ever forward in the yellow cab of my imagination. Whimsy, nostalgia, and so much more than that. Does there need to be more than that, though? Those two things are so beautiful, so joyous and sad all at once. They've helped me along in so many ways, through so many ways. Profound beauty all wrapped up in that slick and lovely groove. People would maybe call a song like that soulless. To me, it's the very embodiment of soul. And so it rolled on, and I did too. Checking their faces. Me, elated. The calmest I'd been in an age or more. And I was never Bobby Wheeler. I was their Alex Rieger. But I was better than Alex Rieger because they didn't just have me. I had them, and we had the music, even if it was only me listening. That was the third best day of my life. And if I whispered that it was the best, well, that was only because they were asleep and I was their taxi. So yeah, there's some poems from the book. It's out. We launched it a couple of weeks ago, and thank you for listening to this and watching this, and thank you, Paula, for all that you do for poetry. Thanks.